Well, good afternoon, everybody. So glad that we have a great turnout and have folks here. Before we start, I'm going to invite our affiliation committee to come so that you can see who we're talking about when we talk about our affiliation committee. So if our committee would come up to the front, well, you can see who all makes up this august group. This is the group, when we talk about our affiliation committee, this is the folks who've been meeting over the last year. Obviously, Sayun down there, our associate pastor, Colin Purcell, okay. Y'all know John right here, okay? And John, actually, okay? We got John and John. We got two Johns here, yeah. We got two Johns there. We have Cassie here. Carrie. See, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm sorry, Carrie. We have Carrie here. We have Ron Sumner here. We have Karen down there. This is our committee. So this is the bunch. Okay, we're gonna take turns talking, but you guys can sit down for a minute, and everybody take a turn here. I'm glad to welcome everybody. This has been a work that's a joyful work. Let me just give a little background. Hopefully, does everybody have two handouts? One that's black and white, question and answer format. One that is colorful and that is more this format. Does everybody have one of those? I think back over there. The background of all of this, just for anybody who's fairly new to our church, we, along with 128 other United Methodist churches in Oklahoma, and along with about 7,000 United Methodist churches in America, disaffiliated from the United Methodist Church in 2023, in October of 2023. And we had scads of meetings about that all through the year 2023 as to why we felt that was the best decision for our congregation. I'm not going to rehearse all of that or go through all of that again. Most of you lived through that, as did we. We had a disaffiliation committee that worked for a year and reported to the congregation, and we did handouts and studies and small groups and meetings like this. And then we finally had a meeting to vote that was run by the then district superintendent. They made the case why we shouldn't do that. And anyway, at the end of that, our congregation voted over 95% to disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church. And now that was towards the end of 2023. So, and I'm not going to go through all that. If you have any questions about how that happened, you can sure ask me or one of us later. Starting at the end of 2023 and really all through 2024, we caught our breath, really, because it was a huge undertaking of disaffiliation for our church. Then we began really a little over a year ago, towards the end of 24, beginning of 25, to say, all right, what's next in terms of, are we going to remain just as a freestanding independent congregation, or are we going to look and see if there is some other kind of association, affiliation, fellowship, group for us to unite with? And we took our time, because I kept saying, you don't get married right after you get divorced. And so that's where this committee came from, our affiliation committee. And after the last year of meeting and studying and doing research and conversations and things like that, you see at the top, our committee has unanimously recommended and voted to recommend to the entire congregation that we become a part of a newly formed group called the Antioch Connection of Wesleyan Churches. When I say newly formed, this is a brand new group. After the disaffiliation, some of the churches that in Oklahoma that had disaffiliated had to decide what was next. Some churches decided they wanted to remain independent, and that they were going to remain independent for the foreseeable future. Some churches almost immediately joined a new denomination called the I should know that by now, the The Global Methodist Church, yeah. Some churches immediately joined the Global Methodist Church, which was a denomination that was formed to receive many of the disaffiliated churches. I'd say of the 7,000 churches in America that disaffiliated, they say a little less than half joined the GMC, the Global Methodist Church. So some churches decided to become independent. Some joined the Global Methodist Church. We'll talk more about that later, or others will. And some of us said, we need to see what else, what other possibilities there are, what other options, what other choices might be there. And so out of some of those many conversations, about 30 churches in Oklahoma and Arkansas started to do some what ifs. What if we were to form a new group? What if we were to form something new that was regional for former UMC churches in Oklahoma and Arkansas? And some of us began to go to meetings around that idea, and quite a few meetings. And out of that, a council was formed to explore creating a new thing. And that council was made up of representatives of 2 people from each of those 30 churches in Oklahoma and Arkansas. And Karen Lawless and I represented our church just to see, is this something that is viable? And with no commitment to be a part of it other than, let's see what could be formed, let's see what could be created. Out of those meetings, this new group, the Antioch Connection of Wesleyan Churches, formed leadership teams, doctrinal statements, bylaws, an ordination process, financial and legal guidelines, and other things that would form a affiliation, a fellowship group that could possibly be helpful to congregations to not be out there on their own. And we'll talk a lot more about that through this as you read through this, as some of us guide through this. I'll just say, what does that even mean, Antioch Connection? Well, I mentioned actually Antioch in my sermon this morning. Antioch is a key church in the New Testament. Antioch is the church where Paul and Barnabas were sent from on their missionary trips. Antioch is the church where they first called followers of Jesus Christians. Antioch became really the strongest Christian church in the period of the apostles, in the period of the Acts. That name was chosen for that reason, for its missionary outreach. But it's of Wesleyan churches. In other words, churches that are Methodist. Every church that's involved used to be a United Methodist church that disaffiliated. So that's the background of where this new thing sprang from. Where did it come from? Why is it called that? And why are we believing that to become a founding member, a charter member of this new thing is, again, exciting, not only exciting for us, but is probably the best thing that we can do to unite with other like-minded congregations. So Karen has been a part of these discussions. I'm going to let her say a word now about that.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit with you. What Pastor Larry had just shared is some of what I was going to say, but I will add a little bit more to it. As he was saying in that third section there, what do you mean by a newly formed fellowship? As he was saying, many of the churches that did not go right into looking at the Global Methodist Church, there were several within that moderate zone, just like-minded churches. And in fact, if you take a look on the backside of your paper, some of the other former UMC churches that have been a part of getting the Antioch Connection off the ground: First Methodist Tulsa, First Methodist Owasso, St. James, Tulsa, Heritage Methodist, and those are some of the churches in and around the Oklahoma area. It was some pastors and church connections from Oklahoma and Arkansas that wanted to come together and see if there could be some type of a fellowship that could be where churches could come together, support each other, gather once a year and celebrate and have worship together, and not necessarily have the overarching structure that we knew from the UMC, and that the GMC was also seeming to take into place, and as they were forming their denomination. So with what, as Pastor Larry had said, he and I represented this church, but not necessarily to put anything in writing, just to help get this organization off the ground. And so over the course of a year and a half, Larry and I went to several meetings in Oklahoma, in Arkansas, and worked on putting together a doctrine for this organization, and ordination structure for pastors for this organization, and legal entity to have it be a modeling program organization, to have it ready to go and off the ground, and then what the gathering would look like, and I served on that committee, what the gathering would look like each year, to come together, to have worship, to talk through, like, for example, if we were to get together, and being the children's pastor here, what's something that your church does well? Well, Vacation Bible School from my perspective, and so let's gather and talk about that, and how can we help another church, and you know, look at best practices for each other to help support each other. But Larry and I actually were ones to help get the group off the ground. We signed our names to get the entity going, but this next year, if we so choose, or any other church that so chooses to be a part of the Antioch Connection, our names would be removed, and those churches would become founding members of the first gathering, which would be coming up this summer, but the first gathering for the Antioch Connection, to see it grow and flourish. And as I mentioned, some of the churches on the backside, the Arkansas churches, there's about 15 in Arkansas, around 15 so far in Oklahoma. It could continue to grow. There may be some other churches, Kansas, Missouri, maybe in Texas, maybe some others in Arkansas. It could grow, but we're going to have some more information shared. But it is exciting about the possibility of possibly being something that we want to be a part of. It was exciting to see pastors who had come out of the United Methodist Church, but here we are in each meeting, able just to soak in the passion and the message of Wesleyan teachings, and not have the politics involved, but just truly get back to why we're in a church in the first place, and how we want to grow and continue to grow and bring in more and more disciples to carry on God's message. So, thank you.
How we all doing? We awake? All right. So I'll talk before anything. There are cards at the end of pews for questions. I don't know if this was said. If you come up with a question, write it down. We'll answer it here. Also, if you leave and you're like, I've got more questions, ask away. We want as many questions. We want everyone to feel good and comfortable when making this decision. We think it's a great decision, but we want everyone to feel just as great as we do. So it's really important that you ask questions, that you feel good, that you get the information. Some people need a lot of information. Some people are like, well, I feel good with a little bit. Everyone's different. So ask away as you come up with questions. You may remember me from when I talked up here a handful of years ago when we decided to leave the Methodist Church. I spoke. I was in a lot of unfun meetings where we looked at a bunch of bad stuff that we didn't like. And I am here to tell you that happily this new group doesn't have any of that. Right? So our major concerns, as this was formed by a bunch of churches that had similar issues that we had when leaving the Methodist Church. So those concerns were taken into account. You'll notice on your sheet there's a number of items. The cost is a lot less. You'll look at that, and that's not a typo. It's only $3,500 a year for a church our size. Even if that goes up, $500 a year over the next, it would have to be, 200 years until we reach the same amount we were just paying. So even if it goes up a little bit, if the overall unit grows, this is such a small amount compared to our overall budget. It allows it to be very friendly for all church sizes to be able to come in if this is an organization that works for them. Our pastors are all appointed by ourselves, so we get to choose our own pastor. We don't have a bishop that decides. It's all in our hand and our own decision, which is a big benefit. We have a lot of people that have a lot of thoughts and opinions, and Larry's going to retire. This is not a surprise. Larry at one point will retire. He might be 105, but he will retire one day. And we would like somebody that we all feel comfortable with taking his position. And that's not going to be chosen by a random third party. It'll be chosen by our church. We can potentially use other pastors within the association and pull from a different church, maybe promote somebody from somewhere else. So it also gives us a connection, right? So we didn't use a lot that the Methodist Church had as far as their camps, and so this kind of gives us a unit that we can do camps with, we can do trips with. Our children's can go and do some stuff with the other children's churches, and so it kind of helps all that. The trust clause, that was a big deal. We own our property, so it's ours. We join this group. They don't have any right to our property. We say we want to leave. We all vote as a church to leave, and we tell them we're leaving, and that's it. There's no fee. There's no, you got to do all these hoops. You can only disaffiliate on the 12th of September on even years. There's none of that. So we say we're out, we're out. And I think that's probably everything on the list. But yeah, there is the doctrine statement. That was a big deal when we disaffiliated. You can see the statement if you go to the website that's at the bottom of the paper that's not the Q&A. There's a website there. Under the About section, so it's going to take 2 clicks. You got to enter that website and then go to the About section. On that page has all of their doctrinal statements. So you can go and you can read them. They're very basic, and they are meant on purpose. They were made that way on purpose. That overall, this is a baseline understanding of what the church believes, and to be part of this group, that you need to be part of that church. Or to be part of this group, you have to believe those things. And so that was a big deal with Methodist churches kind of believing separate things. That's the rule for this one. So read that, and that's all I got. Thank you all.
Okay, I was given the task of answering the question that's on the back of the second page. We've been disaffiliated for almost 2 years. Things have gone fine. What are the benefits of joining a new fellowship? And it says /denomination. Please cross that out. This is not a new denomination. We've realized that verbiage was in there and so forth. So you see a list. Let me highlight a couple of them. An ordination process, which from my view is something like getting your credentials officially for the church and so forth. Where as a part of the United Methodist Church, we had that process. Otherwise, by ourselves, we don't have that process. So that would be something that would be good. One that I underline, clergy accountability. That only means that the group could sense that maybe someone in one church or another was kind of going off track in terms of their beliefs or in coordination with the Methodist Church beliefs and so forth. They would not have the ability to come and say you need to remove that pastor or anything. They would just have the responsibility to let us know that, hey, it looks like things are kind of going off the Methodist philosophy and so forth. Colin already touched on it a little bit, but the one that I thought most affected us would be a network of churches to help us find new clergy when retirements or moves required. Again, Larry's mentioned the word retirement a few times. I'm not sure we'll get him to stay to 100, but at any point, that's one of the things that we'll have to face. Doing that ourselves, there will not be a pastor assigned. So, but there will be resources and a network of people that may help us identify a new pastor and so forth. And then there will be annual gatherings, not like the Methodist conferences, but just annual gatherings. So there are some benefits. It's almost, I think we kind of over time, or maybe even this today, talked a little bit about it's almost like a no-risk deal. We're not spending a ton of money. We're not nobody's ruling us, but we have some guidance and some direction and so forth. So that's the reason we feel like it's going to be a good situation. So I don't have anything else, so I'm not sure who's up next.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about, we had some questions about why did we look at the GMC? A lot of people have heard about the GMC. It's about 4,200 churches in the U.S. now. The reason that we had Ray Crawford from First Claremore come and talk to us. They're part of the GMC. I went to a GMC presentation at Asbury. The problem we had with the GMC was they were too much like the UMC. Their budget this year is $6 million, $1.2 million for salaries. They'll have almost the same hierarchy as the UMC had. They'll assign pastors. We won't get to choose. If Larry retired, they would tell us who we're going to have. It just was too much like the UMC, a hierarchy above us, assigning pastors, apportionments. I've had a hard time finding what the apportionments actually were. They seem to run somewhere between 1% and 3%. So right there with our budget, you're looking at 12,000 plus, even if it was 1%. And we have nothing to do with that money. It's given to them. They do with what they want. So it just was too much like the UMC. And we want to keep control. And it just doesn't. We also looked at, there's not very many out there, new ones. Some people have early on asked, well, is there anything else out there? I'm kind of known, some people that know me as Mr. Research, and I could really only come up with two. One based out of Dallas and one based out of Houston, and neither one of them were anything for us. The one in Houston, or Dallas, was a 100-mile radius within Dallas, as they weren't. So, the others that were out there, we were just like, no, they're just not for us, and especially the GMC, since there's a lot of local, not a lot, but several local churches joined them. That was just our thing, was just, no, it's just too much. We give up too much control, and we didn't want to get in that place again. So I think that's about it on the GMC. So.
Well, as Colin said, and yeah, we should have said this at the beginning, there's note cards, index cards, I think at the end of each pew. And in terms of this room, microphones are kind of important, and we're live streaming this. If you already wrote down a question, may hold it up, and somebody from our committee will bring it up, and one of us or more of us will try to answer it if there are some questions. And if there's not, that's okay. But we want to make sure if there are questions that people get some answers. A couple of things that. Okay, well, we'll get to that in a second then. Okay. The question is, what is the $3,500 to be used for? If you look on the bottom of the first page, or where it says the financial participation for our congregation would be around $3,500 a year annually, as opposed to what we were paying in apportionments before we disaffiliated, which was about $125,000 a year. I don't know if you realize that's how much we were sending to the conference. Mainly secretarial support, that kind of thing, administrative support. Right now, I think there's just a part-time person. It could become a full-time job, but we need somebody to run the website, the one that you see at the bottom of the flyer, the Antioch Connection. Somebody to run the website, somebody to manage correspondence, somebody to just do what you would expect an administrative assistant to do, kind of things. So, really, things like just mailings and I say website development, or paying whatever it does to keep a website going, and those kind of things. And I wasn't a part of the committee that worked out it's a tiered Smaller churches would pay less, larger churches would pay more. You know, it's a tiered sort of thing. In terms of the 30 churches that are now have helped to form the council and are trying to build the structure. We in Oklahoma, we are probably the second largest congregation in Oklahoma. First Methodist Tulsa would be the largest, and we would probably be the second largest. And then, you know, there's like Christ Church on Harvard that used to be Christ UMC, and I say First Methodist Owasso, and some of these other churches that are still good-sized churches, and yet not quite our size. And there's some small churches too. I mean, like say Heritage. And then same way in Arkansas. There's probably, of the churches in Arkansas, there's probably 3 or 4 in Arkansas that are larger than us. And then small churches too. But it's a tiered sort of thing. The larger the church, the bigger the larger the number. But everybody's committed to, since we're not paying any bishops, we're not going to pay district superintendents, we're not going to have denominational staff, because it's not really a denomination. That's why we said cross out that word. It's not as formal as a denomination. It's a fellowship. It's an association. But our church still retains most, if not all, of our control over who we hire, who we fire, what our membership vows, our budgets. I mean, all those things. We maintain local control over all those things. It says you originally mentioned Oklahoma City churches. What happened to them? I'm not. Who's asking that? The thing that was St. Luke's thing from a while back? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, St. Luke's in Oklahoma City, if you're familiar with St. Luke's Methodist in Oklahoma City, they disaffiliate, and Bob Long, the pastor there at St. Luke's, he had initially talked about trying to create something. Some of us met with there at St. Luke's 2 or 3 times, and it just didn't really ever gel. And now there are some Oklahoma City area churches that are interested, even though they are not part of the council, and I'm not committing anybody, including us. But for example, some of you know a church about our size in Edmond, New Covenant Methodist in Edmond, is a church approximately our size, and it's a lot like our church. They've told us we're interested, but we don't want to be part of the group that forms it. But once you get it formed, we'd be real interested in looking at it as joining, because they haven't joined anything else, and they're interested in joining. And I think there's going to be other churches like that we're not part of this council, but once we actually have founding members, there'll be other churches that go, oh, well, that sounds like that'd be a great fit for us. And I think other churches will join, and I think it may expand beyond Oklahoma and Arkansas. Most of the churches involved right now are more on the eastern side of Oklahoma and more on the western side of Arkansas. But I think it'll continue to expand out from that. So, what else? We'll go. Yeah, you're close. What was the question? That's all right. Oh, you're excited. Okay, if you got a question, okay.
Actually, something I couldn't really put off. The rollover. I'm not trying to look forward to your demise.
Okay, we have to repeat the question. Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. The question is when that day comes, when I turn 100. Yeah. No. Obviously, I'm 66. It won't be a bunch of years. I haven't decided. I feel pretty good, and if y'all will have me, it'll be, I think a few years, but it will come in a few years. And when I choose to retire in a few years, the help that this will provide is we talk about a network, because where could we potentially get, where could you, and I say we because I'm not going anywhere even when I retire. We plan to this is our church, this is our church even if I'm retired. Where will we find the next senior pastor? And the idea is, if we're part of this connection of 30 or 40 or 50 other churches, and there is a a church, an Antioch Connection church out there in Oklahoma or Arkansas that maybe has a 40-something pastor and the church is a little bit smaller than ours, and maybe that's a prospect to come here and become the new pastor here. It gives us a network of potential successors. We wouldn't be limited to that. We could look outside of that, but it would at least give us somewhere to feel like, so who are some pastors we know? Who are some pastors that we have had meetings with and gone to camp with and had annual meetings with? Who are, it's like this guy might be the next one who could come here. I mean, that's really what that's about. Yeah, well, that will be, that. Oh, just like, oh yeah, we have of course we have a bunch of different committees that we still had before we disaffiliated, and we kept them. One of those is the Staff Parish Relations Committee, the SPRC, and it will be their primary responsibility when that time comes will be to find and secure my successor, and that will be a job that they have already been talking about, even not knowing when that day is, but they are well aware that is something that will be a big part of their agenda sometime in the next few years. They will, and a church our size, there are even consultants that help you find clergy and things like that. So, but we have a committee that will be their task to secure any clergy, whether it's a senior or associate or anything else, any clergy, that group is the group that finds, hires, secures, interviews, sets the criterion, sets the qualifications, educational and otherwise. So does that make sense? Yeah.
One part of that too is Antioch.
Get a mic, John. Get a mic, John.
One thing we could do, we could have them come help us, like, SPRC. We're not, what's the criteria for a new minister and things? And they could, we could have some of their pastors over here helping SPRC to interview, things like that, kind of get a feel for somebody. So, and we have SPRC, we've already started talking about what are we going to do when Larry leaves. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who has financial or audit oversight for member churches? Our local congregation does a yearly audit. This church is not going to get in the middle of our finances. Now, if they believe that a clergy person is doing something inappropriate, and the local churches, and not maybe necessarily even financial, but just even if a clergy person is preaching things that don't sound at all Wesleyan or Methodist, or is suddenly doing something that just seems real odd, if we join this, and I keep saying this, we are under no obligation to join this, even though Karen and I have been going to these meetings we are under no obligation to do this, but the committee thinks that's what we should do. But if a pastor kind of goes off the rails, if we join this, my ordination will be housed with the Antioch Connection. And let's say I or my successor goes off on a tangent. The local church could go to the ordination group in the Antioch Connection and say, this new guy's or gal is doing some pretty weird stuff. They could then meet with the pastor and decide if he is still in good standing for his ordination. They could choose and say he's no longer in good standing. Now, the local church still has the power to hire and fire. The organization will not have any power to hire, fire a pastor. But they can remove somebody's ordination, and that would be something the local church would probably take pretty seriously if they did do that. Does that answer sort of that question? But no, the auditing is a local thing. We do that now before and after the UMC, we have an annual audit of our finances. So, let me see. Okay. This hand, everybody adopting the same, was it Constitution? Okay. Somebody have to help me with that. Maybe John, can you tell me what that says?
All adopting same constitution have achieved individual churches or entire group. So
Okay.
is everybody joining, accepting the constitution?
Oh. Every local church will continue to have its own bylaws, if that's sort of what's being asked here. We have bylaws that our trustees have approved. We had to have bylaws the day we left the UMC, and our trustees have updated them recently to make sure we're in fully alignment with the practice we've been practicing. But we have bylaws that we had to have, I say, as soon as we left the UMC. And those are our local church bylaws. That this group won't have any ability to change or alter or do anything with those about how we operate, if that's what's being asked. I'm not sure.
So the organization, Antioch, has its bylaws. Now, its bylaws are not about how to run the church. It is a bylaws. They're not loose, but they're more about how Antioch is run, about how it has its own kind of president and kind of how that structure is run. But their bylaws don't impact our church running. So there's not an overlap where they've got some that overarch ours. It's got nothing to do with day-to-day operations. It's more about how Antioch itself is run as a group. And I'm pretty sure those are posted on their website, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's listed as under Constitution. So.
Yeah, the Antioch Connection of Wesleyan Churches is a legal entity now, but no church has joined yet. Because every church that's been a part of this council is doing what we're doing right now, presenting it to the congregations, and then eventually, at some point, probably in the spring, after we've had as many meetings as we need to have, and as many classes have had the presentations, and as many questions as have come up have been answered, at some point, probably in the spring, we will have a church vote. And our bylaws of our church say a 2/3 vote is necessary to join an organization like this. So what kind of checks and balances would be to keep this association on track with the doctrinal statement? Okay. Let me think how to answer that. Yeah, if you want to look at the doctrinal statement, as I say, if you go to the website, which is theantiochconnection.com, that's on the bottom of that little flyer thing. If you scroll down, there is the doctrinal statement, and it's very simple. Most of it is taken from either the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, if you know those creeds. If you've ever been leafing through the old United Methodist hymnal in the back, there's the Apostles' Creed, there's the Nicene Creed. We believe in God the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus. Some of you have it memorized. The Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed. That's what the statements are taken from, and then there's a few others that are more modern, I guess you'd say, and I'll come to that in a minute. But to change those doctrinal statements would take. The council would have to have a very big meeting to change them. I was on the doctrine committee. Okay, when before these different committees, I asked to be on the doctrine committee because for me, everything else is secondary to is this a Wesleyan Orthodox church? As we say, our issues with the United Methodist Church had largely to do with things that there were Methodist clergy and even Methodist bishops who didn't believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus. There were Methodist clergy who didn't believe in the virgin birth. There were serious theological lapses that caused us great concern. And so I wanted to be on the doctrine committee, and I was on it with about 4 or 5 other well, I think it was 4 or 5 former United Methodist pastors and at least one very, very highly educated layperson. And we made sure that we were Orthodox and Wesleyan in those statements. And they would sound very familiar if you've ever read, say, the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed. To change those would be, I guess, there'd have to be some sort of major meeting to change them. Yeah, this is a story that helped us really feel the need to be a part of something like this with a strong Wesleyan Methodist doctrinal statement. And I know this is being live streamed, and I kind of hate to name names, but it's just reality. One of our former associates, Brian Mangan, was the senior pastor at Will Rogers United Methodist Church. Will Rogers United Methodist Church decided to disaffiliate. Brian felt like somebody needed to stay United Methodist to fight the fight to bring the UMC back towards orthodoxy. That was Brian's initial reaction. So that left Brian without a church because the church disaffiliated and he stayed United Methodist. So he was basically fired because he was loyal to the UMC. And then the UMC, just to be real blunt, treated him like dirt. They sent him out to the Panhandle at a greatly reduced salary, abandoned him, and just treated him very shabbily. In the meantime, Will Rogers, and this is hearsay, so if I'm wrong, somebody call me from Will Rogers and correct me if you hear this, but Will Rogers hired a staff person to be their new pastor who was not a Methodist, who was from another denomination. So very quickly, suddenly, Will Rogers had a senior pastor who was not Wesleyan or Methodist. And that's how quickly a congregation could lose its Methodist roots or its Methodist ethos. And that's one reason we feel like being a part of an organization like this that has the name Antioch Connection of Wesleyan churches and has a doctrinal statement that is very much influenced by the Wesleyan understanding of Christianity, that it would keep churches like ours, because we have to think. And again, I'm not telling. I don't know when I'm going to retire, but it won't be super long from now. Not only do we want whoever follows me to be Methodist and Wesleyan, we want whoever follows them to also. We want that to be the heritage of this church. This church has been a Methodist church, a Wesleyan church, for 123 years, and we don't want to lose that. And being a part of a group that holds on to its Methodist roots is one way to help us, for the next generation, stay Methodist. What's the difference between a fellowship and a denomination? That sounds like a John question. John, why don't you tell us why we're not using the word denomination?
My soapbox, right?
Yeah.
So I think we all think of a denomination when we hear that is a large entity, right? We came from the UMC, it's a large entity. It has structure that tells us not only what we believe, but how to run our church and how to do our business here. Takes away a lot of the autonomy that we have as a local church. This being an association, they don't tell us how to run our business. We agree that we have the same beliefs they do, and that's how we're going to practice here. But overall, they don't have any say really in what we do. So that's the biggest difference between a denomination and an association or a connection, I think, is the other word that we like to use, right? It puts us together with like-minded churches, but we're not tied in. We can do whatever we want. No. We can leave whenever we want. We can't do whatever we want, but we can leave when we want, and we can make the decisions here financially and otherwise that are in the best interest of our local church and congregation.
Why the long name for the denomination, for the fellowship? Why the long name for the fellowship? Couldn't it have been shorter or simpler? I guess it could have. You would not believe how hard it is to come up with a name of a group that has not already taken. If you just did a Google search, names of denominations, you would see hundreds and hundreds of fellowships and denominations and connections, and every combination of the words God, Jesus, church, fellowship, and even Methodist. There are dozens of groups, denominations, and fellowships that use the word Methodist and use the word Wesleyan. And coming up with a name that wasn't already taken was pretty hard. And some of it, Antioch, it took us a little time to go, Antioch, that sounds, a lot of our lay folks don't resonate immediately. What is Antioch? And the reason, the person whose idea it was, and he has grown to be a friend of mine now, is pastor down at First Church Tulsa, First Methodist Tulsa, Andrew Thompson. Has been the pastor there now for a couple of 3 years, who is, before he came to First Church Tulsa, was a professor of Wesleyan theology, as well as a pastor. He came up with the idea of Antioch because it is the first church where they used the name Christian, and it was the missionary church. It was the church that sent out Paul and Barnabas. It was the church that sent them out to evangelize. And is it the most familiar word in the Christian lexicon? Probably not. It's kind of grown on us. But, we're not going to put this on our signage everywhere. It'll be on our website that we are, if we join, that we are a part of this. But it won't be on our signs or our letterhead necessarily. It'll be there, but our name is going to be First Methodist Church of Broken Arrow. And that will be what our ID and our logo that we've created and all that. The fact that we are part of this association, we won't hide it, but it's not going to be all over every sign in our building. So it is kind of a long name. I realize that. Is there a percentage that has to vote for us to do this? Yes, 2/3. If we don't join, basically what do we do? Is what I think this question is. Well, as we said, we tried to find other options that are already an existing group. The main one was the Global Methodist Church. But when we met with Ray, who's a good friend of mine, who is not only the pastor at First Methodist Claremore, he is what's called the presiding elder for the GMC for half of the state of Oklahoma at no pay, for no extra pay. Even though Ray's a good friend of mine, and if you remember Ross, who was our music leader, it's his dad, Ray was not able to answer a lot of questions about things that were concerning for us. And it just felt like too much control and too much money and too much of the same thing that we got away from. So really, we feel like our choices are this or stay independent. That seemed to be really our two choices. Are member churches adapting the same theological doctrines? Basically, yes. Now, they're not real precise. I mean, we had discussions about, some of the nitty-gritties of theology that churches argue about, like things about the second coming or, things about eschatology, the end time. It doesn't go into any of that side of thing. It doesn't go into things like, some churches maybe, have more language about, they may use different words about how they talk about the scriptures. It's a very traditional Orthodox statement that doesn't get down into just super detailed, but it does lift up very clearly things that are important: the resurrection of Jesus, the virgin birth, salvation by faith through Christ, things that are like. Who determines what churches can join or be kicked out? If we as a church vote that we want to join, then we'll submit an application, and there's a committee that will look at our church and make sure we fit, which, since Karen and I have been a part of this thing, I think our chances are pretty good that we would be accepted. But yes, for other churches that want to apply to be a part of it, there will be a committee that will look at applications and make sure that church does fit the theological and structural and everything else to be a part of this group. I think that's all the cards I got. Oh. Okay, you're going to talk. Go ahead.
Okay, so this one is asking, in the future, if the association starts to change the structure to be more like the global, what would keep them from doing this? And I just read the bylaws because I didn't know the answer to this. But it takes the 3/4 member vote of the churches who are part of it to change the bylaws or the Constitution. So if you want to change any part of the Constitution, as far as if you own property, if you want to change any wording in that, it has to be a 3/4 vote of member churches. So each church gets one vote, or maybe there may be you might have multiple people, but every church would get the same vote. So it has to be submitted well in advance. So that's what's keeping them, at least the structure-wise, from changing to a different structure. So everyone would be known. It would be a very public vote, and then we could, if we disagreed with how it was swaying, we could always submit to leave before the vote, or up until the vote. Typically for votes, there's a date in which it becomes active, and we could submit to leave before then. So.
Okay. Would we change our bylaws to require that any preacher we hire be ordained by the Antioch Connection to ensure we retain our beliefs? That would be an SPRC question. If we were out there searching for the next pastor, my understanding, I've read the bylaws too, but it's been a while. I do not think the Antioch Connection requires that a pastor of an Antioch Connection church immediately join and put their ordination there. I think it would be very wise, and I think that would be an SBRC decision if that would be a requirement for any clergy to have their ordination registered with the Antioch if this church becomes part of it. I'm not 100% sure of that answer, though, but it would be an SBRC decision. Let me mention one other thing, that if you go and look at the doctrinal things, that I just want to, in case as you're reading through them, I'd say most of it is stuff that's right there in the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed and all that. But if you get down to the bottom, there's a couple of things that are more current, and one of them is on marriage and family. And as you might think, our doctrine committee spent a huge amount of time talking about that statement. And when I first agreed to even be a part of the doctrine committee and even helped to form this group, I said, when it came to any statement about sexuality or marriage or any of those things, I said, it can only be positive statements. I said, I don't want us to call out anything and say this is bad or this is wrong. I said we should say this is what is good, and it be a positive statement and not a negative statement. When I say a negative statement, for example, in the old United Methodist Church, they had a statement calling out homosexuality, saying it was incompatible with Christian teaching, and other things like that. I said we need to lift up what we do believe, not what we don't. And the initial statement was written, and I brought it back to our committee, and John, tell us what happened when they brought the initial statement back to the committee.
We didn't like the wording.
Yeah. Our committee didn't like the wording. It felt a little too conservative, felt a little too restrictive, and they said, "Larry, I don't think we can agree to this." So I went back to the doctrine committee and I said, "Yeah, this one still doesn't fit our church." I said, and they said, "Well," and I said, "I've written something that I think maybe is better." And they read it and they went, "Yeah, that is better." And so the statement on marriage and family I wrote it. So I can defend it or stand by it. And basically it lifts up saying this is what we believe is the covenant of Christian marriage as described in the New Testament. And I chose those words very carefully. It's the covenant of Christian marriage from the New Testament, which is the vows that when I do a wedding, I say, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until we're parted by death. that marriage is designed to be, and we have that word, it's designed by God to be the union of a man and a woman forever. Does every marriage hit that? No. Not every marriage is forever. Every church in this connection has divorced people. Every church in this connection will have people who have missed the mark in marriage or in sexuality or in some other way. But the statement is like this: the ideal of marriage is a union between a man and a woman that is for life, and that the ideal for sex is within a marriage. Faithful in marriage, celibate in singleness. Does every couple follow that? No. I've married couples that were already living together, and I've still married them. Not everybody hits the ideal, but that statement on sexuality and marriage is about this is what, when Jesus talked about marriage, and he said, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. That's what Jesus says about marriage. So that's what if you go and you're going through, well, this is about the Trinity, and this is about salvation, and this is about Scripture, and this is about this and this and this, there'll be towards the bottom a statement on marriage and sexuality. And I wrote it for the committee, and it's about the ideal we strive for, but not everybody, we're all flawed. And there's no expectation that every church is full of perfect people. Every church represented has people who are divorced, who probably there's been adultery, there's probably been all kinds of things in these churches, but we're sinners saved by grace. So does that make sense? Because we want to make sure if you're looking through all the doctrinal statements, you go, oh, this is interesting about marriage and family. That's why that's there, and that's why it's only about positive statements, and it doesn't call out, anything that falls short of that. What else? Okay. Why don't you do that, John?
With all the talk about bishops and hierarchy with the GMC, the Antioch, we have a council, and it doesn't matter how big your church is, there's 2 people from each church that are on this council. And the council is one that votes for, if there was increase in money, they would vote. Trying to think of some of the other, the president, vice president, they serve a 1-year term. GMC is a 6-year term. So if you get somebody bad, you're stuck with them for quite a while. But it's a 1-year term. The council votes on that, and most of it's a majority deal. The representatives would be one lay person normally, and then like the pastor, so it's 2. But like our big thing was, everybody's the same at this council. And as churches come on, you would add to that council. That's how they kind of run it. So, but that was always just, there's a major difference there that doesn't matter how big you are or how small you are, you're equally represented on the council. So.
Well, Colin, were you the one who was talking about risk ratio or whatever that, or was that you, John, who were talking about our risk versus our benefits? Yeah. Why don't you say that again, just so we kind of, for some people's brains works that way, and so.
So this was something that was talked about as far as how the Antioch connection works, is that risk-wise, some people think more literature-based, and some people think more numbers-based. But if you did a risk analysis of the Antioch connection, your risk is almost 0, right? You pay a little money. If it doesn't work out in 5 years or, 3 years or a year and a half from now, everyone's like, yeah, this isn't really our thing. We do a church-wide vote, we get out, right? This could be perfect for us, or it could be in 20 years, you're like, this isn't really working out, we don't like where this is going. You vote out. right? It's a little bit of money, but compared to any other group you go in, financial-wise, this is almost nothing, right? As far as what we have to give. So risk is just, this is a low-risk option as far as groups to join.
So, as we say, if you remember how hard it was for us to get out of the United Methodist Church in terms of financially, in terms of jumping through the hoops that the conference required of us, all the mailings we had to do and everything, and people checked at the door, and you were not allowed to vote because you didn't bring your driver's license today, and the hoops were enormous, and the cost was significant. I think this is a really good option. I think it's the best option for our future. I think it will be very helpful. I think it will be a blessing. I think the annual gatherings will be joyful. If we have a young person out of our church who decides to become a pastor and they go through the ordination process, their ordination will take place here in our local church. And then it'll be celebrated at the annual gathering. That's one of the differences with the UMC. If a year in, 2 years in, 20 years in, if we go, this thing it isn't working for us. We send them a letter we take a vote, and we send them a letter saying, yeah, we're withdrawing. And they go, okay. There's no buyout. There's nothing that keeps us in. There's nothing that keeps us in other than our desire. It's a fellowship of the willing. It's not, there's no hooks to keep us in if we decide we don't like it. I think we will like it. I think we'll be blessed by it. I think we'll discover that it has a lot of the benefits of a fellowship and a connection and very few drawbacks, and we really can't see any at this point. So, yes, ma'am. Yeah, in case you don't know, that's my wife, Jenny, and I don't know if everybody knows that. Yeah, we would come back from these meetings either here or in Arkansas, and especially the one that we had this summer where we really voted to form something. And it was a day and a half, and we had preaching, and we had singing, and we had worship, we had prayer, and it was everything that I wish the United Methodist Church had been. The business took 30 minutes. The rest of it was praising and worshiping and singing and fellowship and meeting new clergy friends from Arkansas and being there with many of the people I know who are my pastor friends in Oklahoma that disaffiliated, that did not join the GMC. And it was worshipful and it was joyful, and you came away feeling like you'd been to church and you'd been to something exciting, which sadly, when the last several years of going to annual conference, that was not the experience at all. That was not the experience at the United Methodist Annual Conference at all. This was what it should be. And even things as small as, man, I'm going to make me choke up about something now. Some of you know my probably closest clergy friend is Bob Feist, who was pastor at Christ Church over on Harvard, just retired this summer from that church. And Christ Church disaffiliated. They're now known as Christ Church on Harvard. And they used to be Christ United Methodist Church. They're on Harvard. Bob and I, and our whole families, Bob and his wife and Janine and I have all been good friends for years and years. Anyway, Bob retired this summer, and if we had still been United Methodist, there would have been a retirement celebration at annual conference. One of the few things that actually were good at annual conference to celebrate the retirements. But of course, since we disaffiliated, there wasn't anything. So we did an ad hoc retirement celebration for Bob at this gathering in the summer. And as one of his best friends, I got to speak about him, and I choked up then, and I'm almost choked up now. And that is one of the few things I miss about being connected to other churches. The idea that you can have fellowship with other pastors, that you can support each other and pray for each other and worship with one another. And yeah, I'd get home from that, and Janine could tell I'd been somewhere uplifting as opposed to coming home from annual conference like that. So I think that was kind of what she's talking about there. So yeah, and that's why we are, if we vote in the spring to join this and then are a part of that summer meeting, and we become a founding member of this group, I think it will be a joyful thing, and it'll be in Oklahoma, and I think many of you will want to be a part of it. What else? Anything else? Okay. Well, now that you all are hopefully informed, if somebody comes up to you, maybe you can answer these questions. And if they come up to you and you can't, just say, email Larry or anybody else in this committee, and and we'll do this again Thursday night, and encourage them to come, and we'll do this all over again and answer probably some of the same questions, and there may be some new ones. But somebody who hasn't really talked very much is Sayun. Will you pray us out of here, Sayun? Yeah.
Would you join me in prayer? Let us pray together. God, you're full of mercy and full of grace, and you are love. Jesus Christ, who is the way, the truth, and the life, the good shepherd, the door of the sheep, resurrection and life. Lord, we thank you that you have led all of us thus far. We thank you for your goodness. Thank you for the wonderful work and the mission that you started and continue to doing in us, through us, around us, for your glory and for the people in our community. Father, tonight as we gather together, we heard the wonderful news and great information about the new journey that we are part of. Lord, we continue to ask, Holy Spirit, guide us, give us discernment. Lord, give us eyes to see, ears to hear your word, your direction, and hearts to follow your lead. Holy Spirit, help continue to encourage all of us for the things that you have for us and for our future, for the children, for our future of our church. Continue to lead us, God. Help us to follow your will. Give us joy as we serve you, God. Be with us. Help us to go home safely. Give us continue to have uplifting and encourage heart, and hard to pray for our future and for our church. We love you, God. We bless you. All we do is for your glory, for your name. Be lifted through us. And we love you so much. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thank you all. Thank you.